Today, we're lucky to have two very prominent experts with us to discuss this issue. I will introduce them in turn. One is Roger Thurow, who's a senior fellow on global food and agriculture at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. And the other who will speak after Roger is Sophie Nodo, who is the Group Solutions, or the Global Solutions Group Lead for Early Childhood Development at the World Bank. All titles at the World Bank are very long and complicated. But let's start with Roger. Roger assumed his position at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs in 2010 after spending 3 decades at the Wall Street Journal, almost all of them covering international issues. In 2003, he was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for reporting on famine in Africa, and he has been honored by the United Nations for reporting on humanitarian and development issues. He is the co-author of a book entitled Enough: Why the World's Poorest Starve in an Age of Plenty. And after that, a second book, The Last Hunger Season, A Year in an African Farm Community on the Brink of Change. We're especially lucky to have him with us today because he just recently published a third book entitled The First 1,000 Days. And the first 1,000 days really refer to the first 1,000 days of a child's life, including while the child is still in the womb, which, as he will demonstrate, is a very crucial time for both mothers and children, and as he puts it in the subtitle of the book, also for the world. So to introduce you to Roger and his latest book, we will show you a very short video clip which describes the book, in which Roger actually looked at issues surrounding malnutrition and hunger in 4 different locations around the world: India, Uganda, Guatemala, and the United States. So on that note, we'll show you the video, and after that you will see Roger, who will give you a presentation.
The first 1,000 days is probably the most important period of individual human development. It begins with the pregnancy of the mom to the second birthday of the child. The most important thing in those 1,000 days is good nutrition. A child that is malnourished and stunted in the 1,000 days will spend less time in school. They may earn 20 to 40% less in their lifetime earnings. A stunted child has a higher propensity for chronic diseases. That adds to the healthcare cost. The narrative of the first 1,000 days takes place in 4 places: India, in the state of Uttar Pradesh; Uganda, in northern Uganda; Guatemala, in the Western Highlands; and then in Chicago on the south side. No matter where I was at these 4 places, there's this universal need and importance of the 1,000 days and universal need for good nutrition. It's not a given. The greatest cost of malnutrition and stunting are immeasurable. A poem not written, a song not sung, a novel not imagined, a gadget not invented, a building not designed, a mystery not solved, a horizon not explored, an idea not formed, an inspiration not shared, an innovation not nurtured, a cure not discovered, a kindness not done. What might a child have contributed to the world if he or she hadn't been stunted in the 1,000 days? A lost chance at greatness for one is a lost chance for all. Hello. Now we're back live with me in Washington. Hope you enjoyed that little video as an introduction to the book, but also as an introduction to this really crucial part of early childhood development, which we're coming today, and delighted to be in the virtual company of all you journalists around the world. It's a special treat. As Chris said, I was a foreign correspondent for 2 decades with the Wall Street Journal, based mostly in Europe and in Africa. and have done a lot of reporting through the developing world, writing a lot about humanitarian and development issues, and particularly on the issue of food security and hunger in the 21st century. And it's in the reporting of that kind of in the progress of both my reporting for the Wall Street Journal and the books that I've been doing while being a senior fellow to Chicago Council on Global Affairs, that it was kind of a natural progression of the reporting that I came to realize the fundamental importance of these first 1,000 days, beginning with the beginning of a woman's pregnancy to the second birthday of her child. And as the video says, the really important nature of nutrition and all things that support it. So what I mean by that is that nutrition, obviously, and eating the proper foods and getting the proper vitamins and minerals, first through the mother while the child's developing in the womb, then through the breast milk and breastfeeding, and then as the child starts eating solid foods and complementary feeding throughout the 1,000 days, that nutrition, the critical fuel, the accelerant for this individual human development, both physical growth, strengthening of the immune system already throughout life, cognitive development, and then also setting the predisposition or lessening the predisposition if there's good nutrition in this time of chronic diseases later in life. And then, but nutrition doesn't work in isolation. It's supported then by all these other aspects of healthy development. Particularly critical are the WASH issues: water, sanitation, hygiene, infrastructure, access to healthcare, health systems, and accessibility of healthcare, particularly in the 1,000 days period, but then throughout life. And so all that kind of unwinds in this book, or I get into all these issues by focusing on several moms and their children and the dads and the families in these 4 countries that we mentioned in the video and that Chris talked about: India, Uganda, Guatemala, and Chicago, and chose those areas for specific reasons in terms of the level of malnutrition and childhood stunting, and the supporting issues of nutrition, and kind of then also to explain the government's role in this, the role of foundations and NGOs, and the critical nature of investing in these programs, which Sophie will also be talking about some. And I think it's really important that the reporting on this, and for journalists to be aware of particularly this period in terms of early childhood development, because as I said in the video, I mean, it's the most important period of individual human development of what's going on in that period, of these children getting off to a good start in life. But by extension, it is then also perhaps the most important period for the development of their communities, their countries, their societies, and the world in which we all live, in terms of creating this stable, prosperous, secure world. And so what's going on in these 1,000 days, fundamentally of importance for the health of the child, obviously, and the impact of the family, but then this greater cost and benefits throughout society. So the impact ripples through time and through place. And one of the consequences of this, and why it's so important, at the end I talk about kind of the intangible cost of stunting. But what's also really important then is, and we explain in the book, then the actual cost of malnutrition and stunting. And that it's the poor malnutrition in the 1,000 days then becomes really important, in that any lack of nutrition, any severe shortage of food really ends up in the stunting of a child, both in physical development, but perhaps most crucially in cognitive development. And so what I've kind of found and kind of came to realize is that stunting is this life sentence of underachievement and underperformance in a child's life. And what the cost of that is for that child and the family and for all society. And we learned from the World Bank and the World Health Assembly and World Health Organization that 1 in every 4 children in the world today is stunted in some manner, physically or cognitively. In the developing world, it's 1 in every 3 children. And you can imagine the cost of that and what the World Bank has been talking about, and Akina Adesina, the president of the African Development Bank, is this crucial nature of gray matter infrastructure, that it's not just important for the infrastructure in countries of the roads and the ports and the airports and the buildings and the physical infrastructure of the country, but this gray matter infrastructure and the development and this early childhood development and the growth of the brains and what that means. And so what you'll find, most of your countries are probably part of this movement called Scaling Up Nutrition. There's more than 50 countries that are involved in that now. It really emphasizes good nutrition in the first 1,000 days. You can check online with Scaling Up Nutrition or the Sun Movement of what countries are involved and what programs there are. But countries have been, as part of that, detailing and calculating the cost in their countries of stunting and childhood malnutrition. And so countries like India, Uganda, Guatemala, which are in the book, are maybe, they calculated 6 to 8 percentage points lost on their gross domestic product every year because of childhood malnutrition. A country like Ethiopia, they reckon it's about 16%. What that means kind of continent-wise, so for sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, it's about 11% annually lost of equivalent loss of GDP, which is a huge number, and you can see how that really then sets back economies. And so what I did in the book was, and in my reporting, is to tell the story of this through the storytelling of these moms and kids and families in these 4 countries. And so I just wanted to show you and take you through some of the families very quickly and some of the things I've learned. So this is Seema and her daughter Priyanshi in India. And again, the stage is set in the first 1,000 days for whether a child can begin to reach his or her potential. In Uganda, one of the families followed was Brenda, the mom, and then Aaron, her son. They're up in Lira, for anybody from Uganda, in the Lira area. They've started growing orange flesh sweet potatoes and high iron beans as part of the Harvest Plus and Biofortification program to introduce more critical vitamins and nutrients into their lives. The orange flesh sweet potatoes, rich in vitamin A. The beans are beans of a variety with a higher iron content. Vitamin A and iron extremely critical in the health and healthy development of children and moms during their pregnancy. And so here's Aaron. He's actually eating and gobbling down orange flesh sweet potatoes with some greens. But again, as I said, the whole wash and water sanitation and hygiene issues, that despite all these efforts on a nutrition front, there was one stage where Aaron and his mom and his whole family had a setback, and Aaron particularly critical because it was maybe when he was 6-7 months old. The well water that they used was tainted, and dysentery spread through the community, and Aaron had a case of dysentery, and his mom was frantic about what was going to happen to Aaron, and it has set back his development. So that's why this becomes a greater holistic effort, that it's nutrition, which is really important, but then you have to look at all these other aspects. I think as journalists, it's really important to remember that there's these issues that kind of are in play kind of across daily life and community life. In India, Shyam Kali, the mom, and Anshika, her daughter. This is on within 2 days or within a day of Anshika's birth. They're in their traditional period of confinement in a room where it's just a mom and a child. There's incense burning, dung, fires, and kind of the room is filled with smoke. But this was important to tell their story of how important kind of culture and tradition plays in the development of the children and with nutrition. Because in that part of India, as it is in other parts of rural India, the tradition was that to discard the first breast milk. And the first breast milk is rich in colostrum, which is full of antibodies, which really goes a long way to strengthening the child's immune system right from the beginning. So in that area, they had extremely high infant first day, first couple of months mortality rate of the children. And a lot of that was due to infections and weak immune systems. And so that was then something that the practitioners and the community development workers were trying to work on. And so here's Anshika at 2 years old on her second birthday. And she's kind of shorter than kind of the international standards for her height would say that she should be, but otherwise she's in good health. And so they were very conscious of that. So one kind of reads the story of Shyam Kali and Anshika and a couple of other families in India along the way. In Guatemala, Maria Estela, the mom, Jorge, the little boy, and then the older sister of Jorge, Jessica. And this is on Jorge's second birthday. And what one sees is that although Jessica is almost 2 years older than Jorge, they're basically the same size. And so kind of here's another picture of where they're side by side a little bit before. So maybe when Jorge is 18 months or so, they're coming up to his second birthday. And they're basically the same size, both in weight and height. And that's because Maria Estela, the mom, joined a nutrition rehabilitation program because she realized when she was pregnant with Jorge, her second child, because she realized that Jessica was not thriving well. And she wanted to know and have more information about what can I do better for this child? And then she heard that and learned that nutrition was so important. And she really took that on, and she's healthier during her pregnancy. And then, you know, Jorge is born, and he's a big child when he was born. And everybody in the community is kind of coming by and marveling at the growth of him. So kind of at the regular periods where they're weighing him on a scale, there's a lot of people gathering around to say, gee, how big this child is and how well he's developing. And so it's through their story we see the importance of good nutrition. This is Chicago. So this is Jessica, her daughter, Alitzel. And why I wanted to focus on Chicago is that, hey, this isn't just a problem that's over there somewhere for American readers, but it's also critically important and vital for the families in America, for moms and children, but also then for the health of communities and societies. And so the nutritional aspect's really important there. There's Alitzel on her, as she's approaching her second birthday, and kind of then in the United States, really getting over the junk food habits. Obesity is a problem that already starts setting in this period. By the time in Chicago, by the time these children are starting kindergarten at about the age of 5, in Chicago, there's already about 25, 1 in every 4 of the children were already overweight or obese by that time. That's all forming in these critical 1,000 days. So finally, I just wanted to say, as we were talking about the impact of stunting, stunting is this harsh word, and it's hard to imagine. It's kind of this measure. 1 in every 4 children in the world are stunted. But what does that mean? Here's a child that I've been following over time. This is Hargirso, the boy. He's about 5 years old in this picture. It's during the Ethiopian famine of 2003. Tasfai, his father, sitting behind him, carried him to an emergency feeding tent because Hargirso, he was 5 years old and only weighed about 27 or 29 pounds at the time. He was on the doorstep of starvation. He started to recover a little bit in this picture when I saw him maybe a couple of weeks after his father had brought him in, but he's still too weak to stand, kind of has the classic signs of malnutrition with the swelling of the face and the arms and legs, but his legs so spindly he can't stand up. At that time, the father, the nurses, the doctors, the aid workers working in that emergency feeding area did not know whether Hargirso would survive. That notion stayed with me from when I left that camp and then Ethiopia, and then went back a couple of other times in 2003 for more reporting on the impact of the famine. But it remained with me all the time. What happened to Hargirso? 10 years later then, before beginning the reporting of the first 1,000 days book, I was back in Ethiopia and set out to re-find and see what had happened to Hargirso and how the family was going. And through the World Food Program, which was still working in the area, found them again. This is the impact of stunting. Here, Hargirso is about 15 years old. It's 10 years later. He's so short compared to his father, so physically stunted. He's in school, hooray for that, but here's the cognitive stunting. He's in first grade. 15 years old, first grade. The day I'm there, they're learning their alphabet. Their combination of B, the letter B with vowels, B, ba, bo, boo, bai. He's writing in his little notebook. But as you see, he looks the same age and height as all his school friends, and he's about 15 years old, and the rest of them are maybe 7 or 8 years old. That's the impact and the cost of stunting that then rolls through time and through societies. And when you multiply that by so many children in Ethiopia, elsewhere in Africa and Asia, Latin America, who are impacted by this, we see the true cost of stunting and the true value then of early childhood development, which Sophie will be talking more about. So I'll leave it there. And Chris, if we want to talk about what journalists can do on this front, that'd be great.
Well, yes, we definitely do want to talk about that, and thank you very much for that very interesting and informative presentation. As you were talking, I was actually asking myself that question: what do journalists do? It seems to be such an enormously complicated issue that it's hard to figure out where a journalist can insert himself into it and not talk just in generalities, but find good specific stories. So I'd like to ask you about how you would approach that if you were still at a newspaper. What specific doable stories would you try to do? And before you answer that, let me just remind our participants that this is supposed to be an interactive session. So we really would like to see some questions from you. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says Q&A, and if you click on that, you can send us a question, and we can relay it to Roger. But anyway, for starters, let's get some real good story ideas, Roger.
Yeah, you had mentioned as part of the contest, I think, are kind of data-driven stories, and so data can become a journalist's good friend. And although in some countries and some places and communities, it might be difficult to find some data, but what I found in reporting on the first 1,000 days is that in all of these countries, in Uganda, India, Guatemala, and certainly in the United States, there were reports that had been done either by the government themselves, by UNICEF, by other UN organizations, by other NGOs on the ground that were really analyzing, here's the situation on the ground and the problems that we find here. Here's the level of anemia in the country, both for pregnant moms and for the children. Here's the level of malnutrition. Here's their own internal analysis of the cost of that. So then myself as a journalist, and for all of you, I would encourage then that, look, statistics are great and data is really good. It can have that, kind of punch of, wow, get a load of this. 1 in 4 children in the world are stunted, or in the Guatemalan highlands, in the Western highlands, like 70% of the children are malnourished and stunted. And it's a staggering number. But what does that mean? So my encouragement and challenge to the journalist would be, is that, look, statistics and data points, they're people, their voices, their faces. And if you can go out in your reporting and match some of these developments and statistics and reports that may be coming out that you're seeing with then people on the ground, and what does this mean? What does it mean that there's 40% anemia in Uganda? What's the impact of that? How are people overcoming that? What are government programs to overcome it? What are corporations or businesses doing, or entrepreneurs, small companies that are coming up? What are kind of NGOs and people on the ground doing? But not only them, but then the people that are then impacted by this, the people in the villages, in the cities, in the communities, and basically through profiling them, which I think are then the really interesting stories. And so that readers are always interested in good stories. And the more that you can tell stories through the lives of people and their eyes and their voices and their emotions, and as journalists to back out of the story, but this is the story of the people on the ground that we're trying to illustrate these things. And that I found that basically that as readers come to care about the people that you're writing about, they then also come to care about the issues. And so just writing about the issues, that may be kind of dry and uninteresting, and people may tune out to that. But if you can illustrate and show those things, and at the Wall Street Journal we used to say, don't just tell a story, show a story. And that the more that you can do that, I think is really good. The other thing, Chris, that I would say is that kind of all you journalists in your countries, that if you have the ability, I think it's great to follow people and issues over time. And so with early childhood development, that's really critical. So if you're meeting moms and children and dads and families and mother-in-laws at this time of early childhood development, if you have that opportunity to then go back and visit them every so many months or every so many years and say, well, here's how that intervention mattered. Here's how it didn't matter, or how with lack of intervention, here's what's happening. Here's the situation in this village, what's happening in these schools, and the kids aren't learning or something, or there's lack of labor, in the fields or in whatever shops or business there might be, because the kids aren't properly nourished or educated. What does it mean for a child like Hargirso as he goes through life? What opportunities are cut off to him? This stunting is this sentence of underachievement and underperformance. How can you illustrate that? And so there's so many issues in early childhood development that you can really illustrate by following people.
Can you give us any guidance on some underlying causes for the problem you're describing? Is it primarily failure of government policy? Is it poverty? Is it culture? Are the solutions more with government or with changing behavior? And I'm actually prompted to ask you that in part by the fact that in the last example you gave, the Ethiopian family, the son was stunted, but the father was not.
Right.
Has something gone bad so that this is a worse problem now than it used to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. And also then, that if one's looking at, well, where are the failures or what happened? I mean, if you then kind of look at any hunger crisis or say the famine of Ethiopia in 2003, kind of what were the causes of that? Yes, there was a drought, but there were so many other causes that happened in terms of with the production of the foods, and even if they had surplus years, there was no marketing that allowed the farmers then to move their crops, to take advantage of that, to get the best price that they can. And prices had collapsed because there was this built up surplus. So there's all these kind of dynamics that are going on around any hunger crisis. It's not that simple as this kind of climatic thing that happened, or it's an act of God or something happens, but there's also so many acts of man that then contribute to a lot of these things. But in this case, yeah, you can look at generational things that maybe when the father Tesfaye was growing up, and in his early years as a child, in his early child development, he didn't have perhaps that a hunger shock. Maybe in the area that he was growing up in, they were always a food secure community. Now these things happen, that there is this food insecurity, there's the malnutrition, there's the hunger shocks, and then you have a child like Hargirso, and he wasn't the only one who was like 15 years old or a teenager in that first grade class. There were others, and they all come from that period of that great famine in 2003. So again, to look at kind of the rolling cost of this, but then in kind of interactions with the government, does the government realize the crucial nature of early childhood development? What are they doing about that? If they are doing this analysis and they see the cost of it to their own economies, is that being prioritized? What's going on in the government? Who in the government is taking this, under their wings and saying, yeah, this is really important? In Guatemala, at the beginning of the reporting of the 1,000 days, and it stretched on over the 1,000 days, so 3 years and then more than 3 years with the reporting and afterwards in the writing, the government in Guatemala started off saying, we're really getting on top of stunting and malnutrition. It's horrible for our country that half of our children are malnourished and stunted. In some areas in the country, particularly in the Western Highlands, it's 70%. We realize it has an impact on our competitiveness, on the development of ourselves, of just the moral nature of having that many malnourished kids in our country. What are we doing to ourselves? They were making all sorts of pledges, and they were, traveling to Washington and receiving awards and things. By the time the reporting is done, and if there's any reporters from Guatemala, that government then was basically in collapse by the end of my reporting over the 1,000 days. They were out of office. They were in jail. They were under indictment. And all the talk that they were saying about this then basically fell by the wayside. So that's something then that the journalists can also look on, that, hey, we're doing these stories out in the field and we're talking to these families, and here's these families we're writing about. Well, what are you guys doing about this in the government? How are you following up on this? Do you care about people in the countryside? And it's always fascinating to see that the proclamations by the government, by foundations, by NGOs, by people in the capital cities, we're going to do this. How much of that actually translates to people on the ground, and to the betterment of people, or any programs that NGOs are doing in the areas, or that local people are doing, and community organizations? What's the impact of that? Is it having any impact? And you can see that on the ground. So it's not some kind of mystical development that's happening, but these are the things that are tangibly there and that you can see.
So I actually take it that the specific causes and even the manifestations and responses all may differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So a reporter has to really hit the ground and find out what's going on in his or her own country to get to the bottom of it. You can't look for global statistics that are going to tell you what's the story in your, where you publish.
Absolutely. And it may be that, okay, maybe things are improving on the nutrition front, but are they improving on the water quality front? Are they improving, that then the kids may be eating well, you're getting the nutrients in your system, hooray for that, but then there's diarrhea and dysentery and everything is coming out of the system. There's the parasites in the system. In Guatemala, it's a huge problem with the parasitic load of not only children, but adults. Those parasites in consuming the nutrients and minerals that are meant for the host body. And so you have to kind of look at all these various aspects of development and say, what's going on here? Are these things all being covered at the same time? And is there this kind of uniform advance in progress?
Okay. We've got a couple of very interesting questions that are really good questions to pose to you as an experienced journalist. One question comes from Ahsan Raza from Lahore, who says that most of the schools don't have sufficient playgrounds for students. And the schools enroll children as young as 3 years old in playgroup classes. So the Ahsan's question is really, does this early education, the playgroup classes, does that really have an impact on children's health? And how would you go about covering this issue if you had to?
It can, have a big impact, particularly then if the infrastructure is there and they have the capacity and ability then to deliver on its intentions and its promises and what it intends to do. So as a journalist, I think that's one thing I look at, and particularly then talk to the parents that. Okay, so you've enrolled your child in this. What were your intentions or your aspirations for this? And what's happening? And does that then match with, well, what's supposed to be promised? And if it's a play group and the playground is in wretched conditions, and if there's kind of meals that are being served at that time, are they of any good quality? What's kind of the nutritional quality of that? So that all kind of goes hand in hand. And so I think it would take some kind of on the ground visiting to those places and just saying, so what's happening here? And then again, the voices of the people in the community, what are they saying and how are they responding and reacting?
There is a lot of evidence that play, if it's properly organized and planned, does serve a very important educational purpose. Isn't that true?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so that can be, the exercise, that kind of everything that's going on in the schools. So, and that's one of the things. So, there was part of the Millennium Development Goals was universal. One of the goals was universal primary education. Hooray, get all the kids in primary school. But again, if there's malnutrition or problems on any of these other issues that we've been talking about during these first 1,000 days, are the children even able to learn properly when they get to school? Have their brains developed and advanced enough in these critical 1,000 days in early years for them to take advantage of the schools that, hooray, universal primary education, everybody's in school, hopefully. That's great. What are they learning when they get there? And that's all that happens in this early childhood development period. So these kind of later markers and development markers, okay, well, maybe they're being really, reached in terms of the numbers are there and you're checking off boxes, but what's actually happening in those places, you know, and the teachers would be good sources of that, what's going on, and the parents themselves.
Right. Okay. We have some more questions, but I think that at this point we should move to Sophie, and those of you who have questions in the queue, rest assured we have not we're not forgetting you. So Sophie Nodo, as I mentioned, works in early childhood development at the World Bank. She's worked in the bank's Asia, Africa, and Middle East regions, as well as in something called the Children and Youth Unit of the Human Development Network. She spent 3 years in the Mozambique country office and just recently returned to Washington. She focuses her work on analyzing the opportunities and challenges that low-income children and families face across regions, and on developing education and multi-sectoral programs that respond to the specific needs of these populations. Before joining the World Bank, Sophie coordinated non-governmental programs for refugee children and youth in post-conflict societies, including Bosnia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Cambodia. So on that note, I'm very honored to introduce to you formally Sophie Nodo from the World Bank.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning and good afternoon to all of you, depending on where you are based. It's really a pleasure to be here. So building on the presentation that Roger just gave and piggybacking on some of the really interesting questions that came from the audience, I'll talk a little bit more now about why investing in the early years is such a critical corporate priority for the World Bank Group. And the reason is that, and here I'm showing you the framework that we are using at the moment on why it's important to invest in the early years. The reason we put so much focus on this now in our institution is that we are firmly convinced that investing in the early years is the best way to achieve the goals of ending extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity. And Roger talked a lot about nutrition in the first 1,000 days and the importance of that, and that is indeed critical. And you can see on the left, you see 3 boxes there in the middle, and the left box is really about that. It's about the nourishment, it's about the health in general of children, for which the first 1,000 days, pregnancy up to 2 years, are really a critical window of opportunities. But there are also aspects of development which Roger started to talk a little bit in response to the question that came on play and other aspects of child development that are important as well, and in fact are necessary for children to reach their full potential in life. And those includes the second box that you see that, which has to do with receiving adequate early stimulation and early learning opportunities in the first 5 years of life. And this includes simple things or seemingly simple things, such as parents playing with their children, parents talking with their children, parents engaging their children in daily activities, so that the children can develop. And then as the children get a little bit older, of course, quality preschool opportunities give those children an opportunity to socialize with other children, to develop their relationships, to develop their eagerness and motivation to learn. The third box is about protecting children from stress and making sure that children are nurtured. In many places where you are all reporting, the violence in the community or in the society can be quite toxic, frankly, for children's development. And we now know from neuroscience that extreme violence can really affect the architecture of the brain development in a way that prevents children from learning. So our framework now includes those 3 boxes: the early stimulation, the good nutrition, and the protection from stress. And at the bottom there, you see all the different other inputs that are necessary to achieve that. For example, nutrition can only be achieved if water and sanitation is adequate, if agriculture is providing the food and the nutrients that the children need. And similarly, early stimulation, early learning, and protection need inputs from other parts of society to be able to happen. So this is a complicated way to say it takes a village to raise a child, which has been known for a long time. And in fact, many villages and many communities around the world are doing an excellent job at raising children. and at making sure that children have all that they need to thrive, and to not just to survive, but to thrive and to reach their full potential. But too often, villages and communities and governments are not able to provide all those critical inputs to children, not because they don't want to. Most parents want the best for their children, I firmly believe, but often because of lack of information about why this period of life is so critically important for children, or lack of income, poverty, to buy the right food, the right nutrients, or to produce them themselves if they are farmers, or lack of power to mitigate the negative consequences of violence on their children. So, like I said, all of this is not new. Many people, many professionals have known the importance of early childhood for a while now. So what is new now, and why is this becoming such a hot topic at the moment? Well, what's new, I would argue, is two things. And the first you can see on this slide is that there's a new momentum globally. Policy makers at the highest level, not just in the sectors of health and education and social protection, but at the highest level of the presidents and prime ministers and ministers of finance, are now starting to be exposed to this information in a way that they were not exposed to it before. Because they are now realizing that not only is early childhood critical for a child's trajectory and personal well-being and productivity throughout life, but it is also critical to breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty and to their economy developing in the long term. So this momentum is translating into two new Sustainable Development Goals that were just agreed last year by all countries around the world. One that targets on nutrition, it's target 2.2, that aims to reduce the prevalence of stunting, which is a marker of chronic malnutrition, by 40% by 2025. And the other, for the first time in any of those global goals, target 4.2, which focuses on comprehensive early development and access to quality early learning opportunities, aiming for universal access by 2030. The other thing is that countries and other stakeholders, including multilateral organizations such as the World Bank, foundations, UN agencies, civil society organizations, academia, and the private sector, are more coordinated than ever on this topic. All those organizations, many countries have done things in the past, but recently they have really rallied their forces in a unique way. They have done so through the SUN, for example, the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, which has been active for several years. And now more recently, there is an Early Child Development Action Network that has been launched in April of this year. That really aims to bring all the positive energy around this topic under the same umbrella and to coordinate actions. What else is new, and why all of a sudden do we realize more than ever before that it takes a village to raise a child, or that all those inputs that I mentioned are critical? Well, we have come a long way when it comes to the global evidence, the science around early childhood development. We had some evidence up to 2000, 2005, but a lot of that evidence, frankly, was grounded in Europe or the United States. And on nutrition, there had been some evidence coming from other countries, for example, from Guatemala. But on the broader early childhood development, the broader framework of the early years, most of the evidence was really grounded in the United States and Europe. But recently, what has started happening is that we have accumulated a much wider body of evidence through impact evaluations and other types of research that have shown that, in fact, those programs, when implemented well with quality, can yield a very positive outcome for the children. That's one thing that has happened that is new. The other thing that is new is that the neuroscience has evolved in a way that we can now understand and visualize brain development much more than we were able to do in the past. So we now have new technology, to look at scans of the brain that show us in very dramatic ways the impact of lack of access to early childhood development services, including good nutrition, early stimulation, early learning opportunities, and protection from stress. So because of this expansion of the global evidence, it has also been easier to convince policymakers to give this topic more attention. I won't go through the slide here. You'll have it for future reference. Let me now move on to the key knowledge gaps and challenges. So as much as we know a lot more than we did perhaps 15 years ago in terms of what the science tells us, we clearly don't know everything. And there are still some key knowledge gaps and important challenges that remain. The first one is that we are doing a pretty good job at small scale, and we know what works well at small scale. Replicating a positive intervention, a very high quality intervention at large scale is much trickier. And there are a few countries that have managed to do this. So for example, on nutrition, Peru and Senegal are often quoted as being very successful stories, successful examples. But replicating what they have done in other countries is not necessarily straightforward. You need a lot of pieces of the puzzle all aligning together at the same time. You need the champion in government, you need the science available, you need the civil society engagement, you need the support, the financial space to invest in those areas. All of those pieces of the puzzle need to come together at the same time. And in many countries, you can have a few of those pieces at a given time, but if not all the pieces are there, then it's difficult to move forward. Another challenge is ensuring the synergies, right? So as much as all those different aspects that I mentioned in the first slide, good nutrition, early stimulation, early learning, protection from stress, and good nurturing, is important together, the governments and to some extent the agencies and the organizations that are supporting the governments are still very much organized in silos. The Ministry of Health is used to delivering health interventions and nutrition interventions. The Ministry of Education is more comfortable with the early learning sphere, etc., etc. And breaking those silos at large scale can be quite challenging. And finally, it requires strong systems in governments, even if some of the delivery of services at the community level can be done by non-state agents such as civil society organization or others. The government has a key role to play in ensuring the quality of the services that are delivered, in ensuring that the poorest can have access to those services, and that requires a strong capacity and system. So those are the pending challenges that we grapple with, and that we at the World Bank are trying to work on to support countries in tackling. So now let me end with just a few suggestions or reflection on how to perhaps report on this early years agenda. And I just want to start by thanking really all of you in the audience for all the work that you do every day, bringing these important stories to life and making them accessible to a larger audience than we as researchers or policymakers can ever do in such a compelling way. And I'm not a journalist by myself, so unlike Roger, I don't. It wouldn't be my place to provide recommendations for how to report on the early years. But I am a consumer of the news, and of course internally in the World Bank we also discuss with our communication and advocacy colleague how to translate the science in a way that makes sense. And so here are a few reflections based on this experience. One, I think it's key to find the right balance between the two, between the evidence and the advocacy or the need to grab the audience's attention. And for example, the irreversibility, what to say, of the impact is something that can sometimes be perhaps overstated. So it's true that early insults to a child's development, to a child's brain development, have long-lasting damage that is can be really critical. But we also know that the brain remains plastic or malleable throughout a person's life. And we know that, in fact, even in chronic malnutrition, we know that some catch-up growth, catch-up physical growth can happen even beyond the first 1,000 days. So I think we need to find the right balance between conveying the dramatic impact of lack of intervention in those early years, while still acknowledging that it is possible to still do things afterwards and to help those children to cope and develop as much as possible to their full potential after this window of opportunity. The second one is keeping the whole child picture, and that's something that journalists probably do better than government and organizations like ours, because you are putting a face to the data, to the story. You are providing a human face, and that's critically important, because too often when we talk about nutrition or early stimulation or protection, we think in silos, and we lose sight of the whole child. There's a bit of a tension between the quantity and quality, which we see, for example, in early learning. So, for example, scaling up preschool education is probably a great thing to do, but only if the quality is good. So we know that poor quality preschool education does not generate positive impacts for children, and could be considered as a waste of money. So, quality is fundamental. And so when you report on the quantity of services that are being provided in a given community or country, I will encourage you also to look at the quality of those services and to reflect that as part of the story. And then the last one is what I call the alarm bell versus the yes we can rhetoric. And if you think of early childhood, I tend to think of it as two sides of a coin. On the one side, if you don't do anything about it, if you don't invest in proper nutrition, if you don't empower the parents and the other family members to engage in early stimulation at home, to engage to provide early learning opportunities, to protect the children from stress, then you get dramatic consequences. The other side of the coin, and the much more positive one, is that if you do invest in proper nutrition, if you do invest in early stimulation and parenting and protection, then all of a sudden those children are set on a much more promising trajectory, and they can reach their full potential in life. So I think it's good to keep the balance between these two stories, the dramatic one and the positive one, and to keep those two sides of the coin in sight. With that, I'll stop, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and questions. Back to you, Chris.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very interesting, and you covered a lot of ground very, very quickly. To start the discussion, and let me again remind participants that we're eagerly awaiting and anticipating many brilliant questions from you. This is I think it's safe to say, a rare opportunity for you to directly talk to some real experts in this field. So please do click that Q&A button and send us some questions. Let me start with one that am interested in personally, and that is how the World Bank itself approaches issues like this. I wondered if you could give us a rundown of what is the World Bank strategy for dealing with early childhood development.
Thank you, Chris. Sure. So we have a bigger or an increasing portfolio in the early years. We are currently active in about 80 countries through one or two or three of those boxes that I mentioned at the beginning, including early nutrition, including early stimulation programs, early learning programs, and social protection programs, for example, through safety nets and cash transfers to help family invest in their children and have access to good nutrition and good early learning opportunities. So we have had this engagement for many years, but it has increased significantly in the past few years. And more recently, with this topic becoming one of our top corporate priorities, as mentioned often by our president, Dr. Jim Kim, and our vice president for human development, Mr. Keith Hansen, we are scaling up even further those investments in the next few years. And we have now identified 22 countries where we will ramp up those types of investment further and support the countries to do more in those areas by 2020, so in the short term, in the next 3 years. We will also have, that might be of interest to all our colleague journalists in the audience, on October 6th, as part of the annual meetings, we will have a summit on investing in the early years, which will be hosted by our president, Dr. Jim Kim, and will include 6 or 7 country representatives at the highest level. In some cases, it will be the president of the country. In other cases, it will be the minister of finance or the vice president, where they will themselves put forward what their country, with their own financial and human resources, but also with support from different organizations, will do to increase the support that goes to this agenda. And that will be a tremendous opportunity, I think, for pushing the momentum even further in terms of what we can all do to support this agenda.
I'm very interested in your comments about the importance of not thinking in terms of silos and the importance of getting away from approaching problems like this in policy silos. But how do we do that? And how does the World Bank help to break down those silos? But also, how do journalists deal with that and themselves encourage a broader thinking and broader approach?
Yeah, that's our challenge. We're not doing it perfectly. I think we have come a long way in doing it better. I think our comparative advantage perhaps at the World Bank is that not only do we work with the line ministries, so the ministries of education, the ministries of health, the ministries of social protection and gender, but we also work through the Ministry of Finance. And in fact, no project is supported by the World Bank unless there is a clear, explicit request from the Ministry of Finance that the country would like to receive support in that area. So that provides an opportunity for us to ensure that the project cuts across the silos and promotes coordination and collaborations across those different ministries. Now, it's easier said than done, and in practice, the pragmatic approach that we typically promote is the notion of strategic entry points. So it may be that in a country there is a very effective nutrition program that has really achieved a lot of success in reducing chronic malnutrition. That's an opportunity to then broaden the scope and try to see if at the same time as the community health workers are working with the families to work on chronic malnutrition, or during the growth monitoring visits, they could also talk to the parents about the importance of early stimulation. So, you know, as they talk with the mom and dad and mother-in-laws and all the important caregivers in the community, this is an opportunity for them to say, your child is on track in terms of his or her height and weight, but are you talking to him? Are you playing with him? Are you engaging her in activities? Are you making sure that all her needs are covered? So those are examples of how we can start breaking the silos. In terms of how journalists can do it, I think, as I mentioned, they tend to do it better than we, because the minute you start reporting, as Roger did, you present a child and her family, those distinctions don't make sense anymore, right? It wouldn't cross a parent's mind to only feed a child and to not interact in positive ways with that child, or to only play with that child but to not feed that child. So I think for parents and for children, and in the ways that journalists cover those topics, it's a lot more integrated in a way than what we do in policy making or what governments do. Or maybe we have some to learn from journalists.
We should save that quote. I'd like to save that and use it sometime.
Sure.
We have a series of very interesting questions from Vinaya, who is from Mumbai, India. And I'll actually start with the third question because it gets to a very crucial question, very close to what you've been discussing, in the blunt way that journalists like to do it. Vinaya asks, how does the World Bank ensure that countries honor their commitment toward bringing down malnourishment? What actions does it take if countries fail to reach goals?
Thank you. Thank you for this question, Vinaya. So I think, as a global community, and the World Bank Group is part of this effort, but together with others, the UN agencies and many others, there's a tracking system that is in place with the SDGs as well as we had in the past for the MDGs to see how much progress is happening across those targets and across the different countries. Now, some of those targets are more easily measurable than others. So target 2.2, which I referred to, which has to do with reducing chronic malnutrition and stunting by 40% by 2025, in a way is easier to measure because we have already universal, we have a measure of height that is universally agreed. And as part of household surveys, all countries have nationally representative data on the prevalence of stunting, how many children are physically stunted. We don't yet have the same in other areas of child development, such as their cognitive development, their socio-emotional development, and so on. And we as a global community are working on that. But how do we hold government accountable if they fail to meet those targets? Well, I think it's an evolving process. I think there is a bit of peer pressure that's at play. So I think the whole point of having those targets and on reporting on how much progress the countries make over time works a little bit as a peer pressure mechanism. When countries see that other countries have made more progress than they have themselves, then perhaps it gives them an incentive to look at what that country has done that they could also try to emulate. And we as organizations stand ready not to penalize the countries for not having achieved their targets, but on the contrary, to support them to redouble their efforts to actually catch up and reach those targets.
So in part, the answer is that journalists they can contribute to holding the governments accountable by pointing out the commitments they've made and seeing if they have fulfilled them.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sophie.
Absolutely, and I think Roger has an answer to that as well.
Yeah, no, if I can just jump in, I think that's a great question by Vinaya. That I think it's frustrating a lot of times for journalists when we kind of see these series of pledges and commitments and MDGs and SDGs, and they're there, and they sound really, really grand, and yeah, that'd be great if one can reach them, and there's all this talk about them. But then how much traction is actually made kind of on the ground or in the communities where it actually matters and these things are going on. And so Sophie's absolutely right that, they have their kind of monitoring, activities. Certainly, foundations or the people that are giving money and grants for these projects, they want to see something to come of them. But I think it's also a great role, as you mentioned, Chris, kind of this watchdog function of journalists really needs to apply also to these kind of social standards and goals and commitments as well. I mean, we think of, so we're the watchdog or the fourth estate, kind of keeping an eye on government and corruption matters and things. But I think part of that is also, well, you're making all these pledges and joining in these global commitments, but what are you actually doing about them and what's happening on the ground? And again, I think a great way then to monitor that is by being in the communities and just saying, are you seeing anything on the ground with this, on vaccination programs, on nutrition education programs, on for farmers to access to seeds and fertilizer and things? What's actually happening here, and is that matching the rhetoric and the commitments that the government is talking about? Okay.
We have a couple of questions that deal with data. One again is from Vinaya, who points out that malnourishment in India is not just a rural problem, but it's also very much an urban problem. And Vinaya asks, how do you go about covering such places, and how do you connect what's going on in the urban slums, say, with the larger picture with the help of data? and at places where data is not available or available from not very reliable organizations in particular. How do you deal with that problem? A similar question actually comes from Samsung. I don't know where Samsung is from, but the question is that how does a journalist navigate the murky waters of lack of updated data on health status, especially nutrition, of children in their countries? And often where the information is available, it is highly restricted. So can you give us some guidance on dealing with these data questions?
So I can start with the first, and then I think Roger will probably have more insights on the second. In terms of malnutrition and stunting in urban areas, and not it just being a rural problem, that's absolutely true. And in fact, I would add, it's not just a poverty problem. So we see, for example, in Mozambique, where I was based for several years, many of the children who are in the richest quintile of the population are also malnourished. And so it's not that they have a lack of access to foods, but there it's sometimes the lack of information about what are the right foods and the right nutrients that are necessary for the children. So the children could be the right weight in the sense that they eat enough calories, but they are not the right height, so they are stunted because they are not eating the right kinds of calories, the right kinds of nutrients that will help them physically grow in height. And so it's not just lack of financial resources, it's also lack of information that is one of the challenges in combating chronic malnutrition and early childhood development as a whole. That can be tackled through complementary services that make sure the food is available, but also provide parents with the information about what foods are good for their children. And when you combine the two together, and we have evidence of that happening quite well, for example, in Nicaragua, we had an impact evaluation there that showed that when you combine those two together, the chronic malnutrition starts going down. On the question of lack of updated data, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the at least stunting stunting data are collected everywhere, probably not as often as we would like them to see collected, and maybe not as transparently available as will be necessary. But at least those data are collected, and I would assume that now with the new SDG 2.2 targets, there will be more pressure globally for them to be collected and made available in a more timely fashion. But Roger probably has more to add.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. And that's also a good question, Thompson. That, I mean, I hate it when I'm going through data or looking for the most recent statistics on something, and now we're in 2016, and you're finding the most recent information is like 2006 or 2001 or 2010 or something, and it's like, all right, well, that was back then, but that's already 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Certainly there's something more current on this. And I know, so there's this global nutrition report that they're starting to put out annually, kind of led by researchers at IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, and World Bank researchers and others. That's kind of this annual look and measurement of, so what's going on in the countries, and to chart that. And I know they've had some frustration themselves, and one instance is in India that, we suspect, and the government's talking about progress and things that they're doing. What data are you basing that on? Where is the most current data? And how can you as governments, no matter where it is, how can you measure yourself if you don't have current data? So I think that's a really a big problem and a frustration for a lot. And I think that, yeah, as journalists, I think it's good to be frustrated on this point, to continue to press and say, where's something more current? I mean, if it's not from the government, so, like in Uganda or India and Guatemala while reporting this, you then have to go to other sources. UNICEF, do you have any more recent statistics? World Food Program, kind of in the measurements that you're doing, what do you have? Save the Children, any NGOs, are you doing any monitoring, even in the communities where you're at, or on a more, regional or national picture? So you try to kind of comb through all these sources and see what's there. But again, the data, I think, is only, is only as important or powerful as your illustrations of that data on the ground and these human faces and emotions that go with that data. So if the data is not there, kind of go out and find the narrative stories, the word pictures that may be in lieu of that data. That, hey, we're looking at urban malnutrition. Gee, it's really hard to find out what's going on in this one urban neighborhood. But a couple days of reporting there shows us this. It's difficult to access these foods, the fresh fruits and vegetables, the meat, the protein sources, everything that's needed. And as Sophie says, where's the information on this? And that the parents themselves are frustrated that we know there should be something there, but it's not there, and this disconnect. And so I think that's really important for journalists to do as well.
So it sounds like you have to do a lot of digging. There's not some easy clearinghouse that's going to magically give you the numbers you need. No,
and then in a lot of places, there's places that do not want to give you the numbers that you need, even if you have them, for whatever they think it's going to reflect badly on them, and it may. But I think that they then need to be convinced that's part of the process. That how are we supposed to hold people accountable, or even do you then show the progress that you're making? So I think the journalism and the newspapers and the radio and television and all kind of the media, the social media, the arts, I think are all a really important part of civil society, and particularly on these issues of early childhood development and malnutrition and education and the toxic stress and things that Sophie was talking about are all really important. And then also to realize, in the question of then the urban slums and the urban situations, how, and I saw this in all the countries that I was in, including the United States, and boy, you talk about violence and the urban and the toxic stress there. Chicago, the violence numbers are off the charts, and they were so there, and the moms and the children and the families would talk about that how are we raising our children in these societies where there's this kind of almost a randomness to kind of what's going on in a place like Chicago. But that poverty then is this big trump card of all these efforts. So there may be efforts to do these things, and even if the education is there, these are the kind of foods that you should be eating. Yeah, the moms they understand that and they get it, but they cannot put that knowledge into action because of the poverty themselves in their households or in the general community. And where are these sources of things? So we always say that, wow, knowledge is power. But the inability to put that knowledge into play, then knowledge becomes a burden, and so it almost becomes this cudgel again for moms and families, that we know you have this knowledge, but we can't put it into play, and that almost then becomes this greater burden.
Interesting. I'd love to get you to talk some more about some tricks of the trade and how you, in all the years as a reporter, what kind of things you did to ferret out data from people who didn't want to share it with you. But maybe we can do that if there's more time. But there are some questions piling up, so I feel obligated to move on. There are a couple of questions that are good journalism questions, which means they may make both of you squirm a little bit. One, again, from our friend Vinaya, wonders if there's any mechanism to independently, for a journalist to independently take note of stories on projects that are sponsored by the World Bank itself. And Vinaya asks specifically, how do you find stories that focus on what is going wrong on the ground?
Mm-hmm.
Sophie, why don't you answer that one?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's for me. Well, we have, so in all our country offices, we have a communication officer who is based there. So, in our India office, we have a communication officer who is based there, and whose task it is to showcase what the projects are achieving and to interact with the journalists in the country to discuss the stories and to give them access to the information. Now, how do you also portray not just what's going well, but what's not going so well? And actually, we're just working on that right now. I was talking to some of my colleagues internally in the bank who were saying, well, in early childhood development or the early years, everything works great when, as I mentioned briefly during my presentation, when the quality is good. Now, there are a lot of examples of programs that don't generate any impact because the quality was not so good. And, or because there was what we call low take-up. So very few families actually benefited from the program that was meant to benefit the whole community for different reasons. And how do we ensure we learn from those failures? And so we are, colleagues in the World Bank are actually putting together a compilation of what is not working so well, so that we can feed that then into informing the design of future projects. And that will be, that is information that is becomes then publicly available and can be shared with a wide range of audiences, including journalists.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, a lot of times these programs, they have to have some kind of internal, not even internal, but just a reporting and evaluation mechanism or report that they do for the people that they're getting grant money from, that the World Bank is looking at, gee, we put so much money in this program. There's some kind of internal assessment that says, gee, that was a good investment, or it wasn't a good investment, or it could have been better. And, if those are matters of public record, and I think more and more they are, I think that's a good place for journalists to also look, is that, well, where's your program evaluation of that? Mm-hmm. If you ask, the Gates Foundation, other foundation funders, kind of even any of the NGO, the World Food Program.
Actually, just to add on that, we have, because thank you, Roger, you're making me think of it. I forgot to mention it, but we have the independent evaluation group in the World Bank, which is, as the name implies, independent, and reports directly to our board of directors. And so every project financed by the World Bank is subject to what we call an implementation completion report when it is finished. And then that report is reviewed by the IEG, the Implementation Independent Evaluation Group, which then writes their assessment of what they think has gone wrong and all right. And that information is fully public on the website. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, I was going to say, and even some organizations, so like the 1 Acre Fund, which was kind of an agriculture development social enterprise organization that I wrote about in the last hunger season, that works in a number of countries, particularly in Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, and other places, that they've started an archive themselves of here's projects that we've worked on behalf of the farmers and kind of what'll work to help the farmers. Here's also projects that didn't work so well. And they figure that having that in their archive is as valuable as saying, yeah, here's ones that really worked, and here's what we're doing well, because that's a learning process for themselves and then for others. And so people don't need to either reinvent the wheel, or they don't need to go through the same stumbles that some of these organizations are going through. So the more cognizant that they are of that. So I think more organizations are doing that. So I think if you look through the websites, make the proper calls to people at the World Bank, at these institutions. So what is your reporting on these projects? I think helps. And then also with their civic organizations that are also looking at these things. Because a lot of times the World Bank, as part of their programming, they have to deal with civic organizations on the ground and community organizations in those places. And it's also then asking them, so, you've been observing this World Bank project on the ground, or, some agriculture development project. What are you finding that's going on? Are you happy with this? Where are your problems? And so, so I think it's important and incumbent on journalists that, yeah, we're looking for, okay, where are things going wrong and where's the problem with this? And that's really good and instructive. But if there's innovations that are coming along that are promising or are hopeful or have some kind of new angle or new spark to them, I think they're also exciting to write about as well. That, boy, look what's going on with these kind of, biofortification of these orange flesh sweet potatoes, or with cassava or maize or something else that's going on. And what are people doing to surmount the problems, in addition to writing about the problems? What are people doing to conquer them and surmount them?
Okay, we're really very short on time. I'd like to relay a couple of questions to you that probably you'll want to answer at length, but I'm going to see if you can answer them very briefly.
Everything at length.
And maybe we can follow up. And in fact, with questions that we run out of time to answer during the webinar, we can also answer them by email. But there are two questions about specific issues, health issues, One is what is the World Bank doing specifically when it comes to the issues faced by HIV positive mothers in developing countries? And another question is, what is the impact of domestic violence on cognitive growth of toddlers? So is it possible to do those quickly?
I'll try. I'll start with the second one on domestic violence. So that falls under the third box that I had there in that framework, which was, what I talked about, toxic stress. When there is acute violence, either in the family directly or in the community or in the society, it could be, abuse in the family, it could be civil war, and anything in between. There is a real danger that the child will be seriously affected in a way that, as I mentioned, changes the architecture of her brain and has long-lasting consequences, negative consequences. Now, what can be done, I think, is that I cannot answer in 30 seconds. I think we have a range of programs that aim to promote the protection of families and children in countries that address this issue. But we can discuss further, as you suggested, via email. On HIV positive mom, again, we have a range of programs in maternal and child health that ensure that the transmission from mother to child is as limited as can be, and that those children are then provided, who are particularly at risk given their family circumstances, are provided not only the health support that they need, but also the nutrition and all the other pieces of the package that I mentioned. That's about what I can do in 1 minute, but happy to discuss further offline.
I can also say on kind of domestic violence, on cognitive development, I think it's really, it is one of the, also one of the crucial factors and one of kind of these holistic aspects of early childhood development that I was talking, that had mentioned and Sophie talked about too. So not just nutrition or the wash issues, but this toxic stress and what's going on in the families. And in doing the reporting on the first 1,000 Days book, in these countries, I actually found sources, either organizations, so NGOs that were looking at this issue, the frequency of domestic violence, people's attitudes towards domestic violence, the attitudes of the moms towards domestic violence. And those reports, there was one in Uganda, India, and Guatemala. One report, I think, in Uganda, even that was mentioned in the government report, in terms of the frequency of this and attitudes toward, as I said, and then the impact of that, and that it's just that also is a debilitating factor in early childhood development. So even on issues like this, there can be information that's available.
Okay, well, unfortunately, time is our enemy. But there are some questions pending, and some of you have actually even asked how to get in touch with you later after the webinar is over. So what we suggest is for anybody out there who still has pending questions, they could submit them to the contest website that I told you about, and we will relay them to our distinguished experts. So again, if you go onto the website, www.icfj.org/childhealth. Child health is all one word. You will find a place on the website where you can send in questions, and we will definitely relay them to the. Is that an email address? I just got an email address too. You could send an email to childhealth@icfj.org. So between those two places, our experts cannot hide.
Right.
And we'll get these questions to them. I'd like to give both of you a minute more if you'd like to say any concluding words, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to call this session to an end.
Sophie?
Thank you again for all the work you do out there, bringing those stories to life. Please keep doing it, and I think you are making a great contribution to the field. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say thanks to all the journalists that are interested and involved in the reporting on health matters, early childhood development issues, nutrition, malnutrition, hunger in the 21st century issues, because I think these are crucially important, not just for human development and as a matter of human interest, but they're so critical for the health and development of your societies and your countries and your economies. And so I'm biased on this on the basis of what I'm reporting on, but I think this is truly one of the great subjects that needs more reporting on. So well done to all of you, and keep it up.
Well, thank you both very much. Sophie Nodo and Roger Thurow, you've been very stimulating and very challenging, and your passion comes across very clearly and is much appreciated. So we will be in touch. We're going to be staying with this issue, and we hope to be in touch also with you, the journalists who have tuned in and to watch us today. But for now, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.